We talk about how crappy they are, this and that. We just keep kicking and kicking and kicking. And I would highly invite those individuals to get the out. And I'm going to be honest, because guess what? There's no place in this world for people like that. If you cannot be kind to your fellow human, and trust me, I'm like you all. I get upset, I get angry, I get mad, but there's a difference of getting mad and upset and actually follow through and actually being intentional with that hate or anger or resentment or whatever you're trying to attack that individual for.
Thank you for tuning in to the Critical Conversations podcast, brought to you by Mind the Frontline. Established in 2023 as a 501c3, Mind the Frontline is your ally in the journey to support those who selflessly safeguard our communities. Their core mission revolves around pioneering innovation and research, education, and overall well-being specifically tailored to healthcare, military, and public service frontline first responders. The Critical Conversation podcast is a dedicated space for police, fire, EMS, allied health workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Here, we dive into the heart of the matter, tackling essential topics such as mental health strategies, recovery methods, treatment options, the latest research, and professional development opportunities. Before we dive into today's episode on Critical Conversations, we do want to, however, acknowledge the nature of our discussions. Some of the content discussed may be triggering or intense as we explore the challenges and the triumphs within the first responder community. We recognize that these discussions may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you or someone you know is struggling and needs immediate support, we urge you to reach out to your agency's mental health resources or your local peer support group. In time of mental health crisis, you can always contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by phone or via text at 988. Please remember you are never alone and help is always available. At Mind the Frontline, we are more than just a podcast. We are a community committed to fostering resilience within the entire first responder family. So whether you're on the front lines or supporting those who are, we invite you to subscribe, engage, and be a part of this vital mission. To learn more, please visit us at www.mindthefrontline.org. Now let's dive into today's critical conversation.
Welcome, first responders, listeners, and Mind the Frontline members. We welcome you back to another episode of the Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline, the podcast that stands on the front line of first responders' mental health, wellness, and recovery. I'm your host, Chris Matana. I'm a former firefighter and a flight paramedic and also president of Mind the Frontline. And I'm thrilled to have you join us today for today's episode on recognizing and addressing compassion fatigue in first responders. We have an absolutely incredible episode today lined up for you, featuring a fellow first responder who brings real life experience and their passion to this topic, which is more important. Our guest today is Sam Brawley. Sam has been in EMS for over 18 years in various EMS positions and is currently flying, and she is the host of the 911 Nonsense podcast. If you haven't, go over to Sam's Pursuit at mycanvassite.com and you can check her out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode and have some mindful conversation and discussion about compassion fatigue. Sam, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us and have this conversation. It was a really good topic that you picked out. Why was this topic something that came to front of mind? And tell us a little bit about, where you are, who you are, where you come from, so our viewers and our listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit more.
Hey, Chris. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you interviewing me and putting me on and putting me out there for everybody to kind of listen to me. My name is Sam. Again, I am the host of the 911 Nonsense podcast. I have been in EMS, again, like you said, for over 18 years. I'm hitting 19 years this year. Started out as a volunteer firefighter, have progressed up to flight paramedicine, which I've been doing for the last 5 years. I decided to pick compassion fatigue. I mean, that is one of the really, really tough subjects that we're having right now. And if you look into it and you try and find studies on it, there's actually not a lot of studies on it because it's hard to get people to talk about this topic. Nobody wants to discuss these problems that we're having in our EMS, and first responder professionals because there's such a huge stigma on it. People are afraid to express their feelings because they're afraid they're either going to lose their job or get told that they're not mentally fit for their positions. And it's scary. And I think it just needs to be something that's spoken out about a lot more.
I couldn't agree more with you, Sam. Trying to do some data and some research of today's episode, trying to find statistics and things like that. Anytime I do a mental health and wellness episode, it's extremely hard because the research just isn't there, or it's slowly coming along. So there's just not a lot of data available out there that we can look into it. And that is one of the problems, is we're all fearful to talk about these things. We've been stigmatized. We have this hero complex where we feel like, hey, we have to be self-resilient. We have to have this unrelenting courage. We have to put this facade on that, hey, you can't damage me. And that's just like the machismoism of our industries, right? Whether you're a police officer, a veteran, a nurse, a physician, a dispatcher, it doesn't matter. We have these kind of stigmas around us of who we are supposed to be as we got into this industry. And what we fail to realize, I think, is we are all human. And I'm no different than my wife, who's a perfusionist. I'm no different than my dad, who's a retired Forest Service cartographer. We are all human. The machismo image of public safety and first responder, I understand to a degree, but I also see it as one of our great inhibitors and a detractor to where our industry and why we're seeing such a rise in mental health, injuries and issues among first responders. They're out of control. So, I think when we start looking at compassion fatigue, I want to talk about maybe a little bit of compassion fatigue 101. Like, what are some of the basics and recognizing some of the signs when we talk about compassion fatigue?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest issues, right? Because a lot of us don't realize that we're even having compassion fatigue until it's too late or we're too far out. Like, we're called burnt crispy medics or burnt crispy EMTs because we just don't realize it. And some of the first signs that, that I've kind of started pointing out in people and kind of noticing in myself is whether or not you're ready for that next call, right? So you're hearing those tones drop, and it doesn't matter what the call is, but when you hear the tones drop, or your pager, I'm old school, pager, your cell phone or whatever, the radio, whatever utilities they're using for you guys, and your first thought is, not another call. That's definitely one of the first signs for you for compassion fatigue. When you're dreading going into work, when you're having a really hard time going to sleep at night because all you can think about is, I have to go to work the next day. Like, these are some pretty priority signs that you need to start either looking into help or taking a step back and realizing what I call emotional intelligence, right? Being able to recognize in yourself that you're having these symptoms and that maybe your fellow peers are also having those symptoms, or maybe they're seeing them in you and they're kind of afraid to say something because you might bite their heads off. Those are important things to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I like how you said emotional intelligence, because I can honestly tell you, until I got sober and really started working on myself, I didn't have a lot of that emotional intelligence. And some of us just don't have those tools when we get into the profession. And then the additional compounding trauma just kind of adds to that, right? It just,
Yes.
and I like how you put it. Like, sometimes we're not aware. I wasn't aware. I call it kind of a general fog. It could be a fog of compassion fatigue, of burnout, of depression. These are just, different things. But what I find is, unless you have that emotional intelligence and self-awareness, you're just not aware of it. You're just like, I don't know why I'm off. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know why I feel like this. I don't know why, for me, I would wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh man, I don't want to go. I'd be stressed about it. Anytime my phone went off, or, cause I'm from the pager days too, I remember having those, but, at the last part of my career, we were using the cell phone, and everybody likes to use the alarm so that they don't sleep through it or whatever. I figured dispatch is going to call me if they're going to need to get a hold of me. So I eventually changed that, because if I heard that ringtone go off at the grocery store, and this would happen, it's common, I got immediately triggered, like, and it's just a immediate dump of dread, and followed by like increased heart rate. I panic. I have an anxiety, pretty much a little mini anxiety attack just off of that. And compassion fatigue, we are empathetic providers and we're human, right? So we want to help other people. But the hard thing is when you're that far down and you have pretty much exhausted your compassion, it's a really difficult place to be because you're really not an effective provider for others, let alone yourself. And that spills over into your personal life, with your home life, with your marriage, your family, kids, a significant other, whoever you want to kind of say. I liked how I was reading kind of from the Journal of Traumatic Stress. They looked at it and they said compassion fatigue is the pervasive challenge faced by first responders impacting their mental health and well-being. According to that study, they found that 67% of EMS workers experience symptoms of compassion fatigue right now, and they're not even aware of it. 67%. That was literally the very, very few of the research I was able to find for this topic today. But, I like how we're starting to, but 67% is a pretty large number if you think about the total number of EMS workers in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's a huge number, huge number. And it's so unfortunate. And like you said, we are, as a community in EMS, starting to point out and figure out these symptoms and starting to address them in some companies, not all companies yet, but we are working on that. I'd like to point out too, while we do suffer from compassion fatigue, there are also family members that are suffering from compassion fatigue. We had a cancer scare last year in our family, and I got to witness firsthand, my wife actually suffering from compassion fatigue because she was doing so much for her mother, and it was just nuts. And you try to explain to family members, yeah, I'm gone all day and I'm taking care of these people and I'm putting everything I have into that. And it's hard to come home and feel that same empathy and that same compassion towards your family members because you're just spent. And all you want to do is go home and go to bed. And she got to witness it. And it was hard for me to watch her going through that because I recognized those symptoms and I was able to kind of point her into the right direction to help kind of stave off some of those symptoms, but it's still hard. And yeah, that's really hard. Compassion fatigue is just so terrible. And it's not going to get better. Unfortunately, we're so short-staffed in everywhere. Everywhere is so short-staffed. You're saying 67%. I would bet that is a higher number, but people didn't want to admit it. Yeah, you have your EMTs that just don't want to admit that there's anything wrong. But then you have people like Lindsay Ewing from the pre-hospitalist who's super positive all the time and just has a great outlook on everything. You do have those providers too, and that's fantastic. But the majority of us just aren't built like that.
I like how you brought up family members because I can tell you that when I was going through my stuff, depression, anxiety, just struggling to find the joy in life, things like that sucked the life out of my wife. It takes away from our family because you're right. We come home and we're spent. I would come home and I would be, abrasive. I would be, short-tempered. I didn't have a lot of, I remember when my grandma passed away, I felt nothing. I was emotionally just out because I didn't have anything left to give. And the more that we work, the more that we pour our hearts and souls into, treating the patients that we want, because that's what we want to do. We're so drawn to, I got to help this person. I got to help this person. I got to help this person, that we kind of put them sometimes ahead of our family members and even ourselves, obviously. And it's hard. It really is difficult to get yourself out of that. Having emotional intelligence, or at least working towards it, I think is one way that we can help, at least recognize it. And it does, at least for me now, I recognize when I'm burned out. I recognize when I'm depressed, but it took some work on my own part. My therapist, I say this almost every episode. If you don't have a therapist, I highly recommend you start the search now, because when you need them, it's going to take you a minute, and it is going to be a little bit of a challenge to find the right therapist and the person to talk to for you. But having a therapist is one way that you can work through some of these issues and feeling compassion fatigue and not feeling like you have joy in your career or your profession. And eventually that spilled over to my hobbies. I didn't even want to go snow skiing. I didn't want to go wakeboarding. I didn't want to do anything other than just come home and drink. That was my way of coping. I just came home and got drunk. So I didn't have to worry about it. But then obviously that brings its own bag of shit to the table. And I don't, I don't say that lightly, but yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge because we don't know that we're in it. And this is where I think the importance of buddy checks really are, because I don't think we say it enough. I can't remember where I heard it exactly, but I remember someone saying this not too long ago, within the last week. They were like, "Hey, I got so far down. I wasn't healthy. I was overweight. All those things. I was depressed." And my guys kind of knew, the chief's staff kind of recognized it, but nobody said anything. Nobody said, "Hey, chief, like, are you okay?" And that's where I find that we don't have these conversations as fluidly or as candidly as we probably should, because there is a barrier there. We don't like to talk about our feelings. I want to seem like I'm strong. But when you see and observe someone that that's your friend, your coworker, whoever, and you see that they're struggling, I encourage people to speak up, because we're not speaking up enough. And by not speaking up, it continues to perpetuate, the compassion fatigue, which then comes with depression and suicidal ideations. And it just keeps going down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And so, I do think we need to have these conversations more, and just kind of understanding some of the basics, not feeling joy. I'm depressed. I feel like I don't have any energy. I'm sleepless. I'm restless. All sorts of signs go into this. But if you start, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're like, "Hey, I at least answered one of those," you probably have some form of compassion fatigue, and then that kind of gets blurred in with burnout and depression and anxiety and all the other stuff, because I never think it's just one thing that's causing something. It's usually a multitude of things, and we just got to sift through, okay, well, what is the underlying thing that's causing this?
Right. And I like how you talked about, your fellow peers checking in on each other, because one of my old managers used to say, "You are your brother's keeper," right? So maybe our bosses aren't going to notice these things because they're not seeing us as often as maybe our partners, or, the people that are sitting in the cabin with us in these trucks. And even if you're not the most senior person, if you're somebody who knows about this, right, and talks about and really cares about mental health, then say something. Speak up. Don't be afraid. And if you're getting a lot of pushback, and you feel like, okay, somebody needs to talk to this person, they clearly aren't listening to me. It's not necessarily them ignoring you, but maybe it's not the connection being right? So if you are not working for that person, maybe try getting somebody else to talk to them if you're that concerned. And then, like you said, find yourself somebody who you can talk to, a therapist of some sorts. But don't go in with the expectation that the first time you talk to somebody, it's going to be a perfect fit. And just because you do it once doesn't mean that, okay, I tried it, that's it, that's the expectation. No, sometimes you have to try talking to multiple different people just to find somebody that fits right with you, or somebody that understands what you're going through and can help you work through it.
I 100% agree with everything you pretty much just said. We don't talk enough. I feel like we don't connect enough, but yeah, that is the point. Like, maybe there's just not a connection. So don't take it personally if you're trying to reach out and help somebody. The fact that you actually reached out and tried to make yourself available or make the person aware of what's going on, like that in itself deserves a kudos, because that at least hopefully might make that person self-aware of what, hey, if so-and-so saying I'm off, like maybe I'm going to, do some introspective, meditation, or look at myself in the mirror and kind of go, are they right? Do they have any weight to what they just said? And hopefully, it kind of inspires that individual or triggers that individual to hopefully seek out, and go further down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and go, okay, well, yeah, they're kind of right. Like, I have been kind of abrasive lately, and I really don't like doing any of the truck checks. It's not that I'm lazy. I don't care. Just don't care, and that there's a difference there. And I see, for employers, when we get down there, they look at some people like that as difficult employees, when really they're just out. They give 0 Fs, right? They have 0 Fs to give. And that's where they're coming from. It's not that they don't want to, it's just they emotionally can't. They don't have any more bandwidth. It's all gone. It's been wiped out. And if we don't take care of our own, And we don't recognize some of these things. And more importantly, say something. If you see something, say something to some degree. And if you're not comfortable having that conversation with that individual, I highly implore you to try to utilize your agency's peer support team or, management, a supervisor. Hopefully you have that culture built into your organization where you feel safe and you can do that. I know there are a lot of people that are fearful of that, and they don't do it just because of that very reason. They just feel like if I go to a management or I go to the supervisor and say, hey, Jim over here has an issue, or Sarah seems like she's really down and I'm concerned, they're fearful of negative repercussions coming to that individual. I think we need to start really getting around that, and not using that as an excuse anymore, because by moving forward, hopefully there's not a negative consequence. But I'm not going to say that doesn't always happen. But that is how we affect change. It may not be something like that you want to hear, but we need to push the boundaries. And if we don't push administration and we don't push the culture in our organizations to change, it always is going to remain the way it is. And we know that that's not working.
Right. And I like that you talked about potentially a peer group at your company. And here's the thing, like if you don't have a peer group at your company yet, push for it, right? Try and get that started. Try and figure out what resources you need and see if you can get those from your management or from whoever, and if your company is not being supportive of that, maybe that's something to think about, you know what I mean? So one of the old ambulance companies that I work for, I just found out, they actually have a huge, they're working on mental health for these people that are working for their company. It's a huge company. And so they've tried support dogs. They've brought in a therapist that's there several days of the week that you can go talk to, like anytime if you have downtime or if at the end of your shift. Like they don't force anybody to go talk, but they picked a specialist specific for EMS. And then they give you, on top of your sick days and your vacation days, they give you 2 mental health days. So if you call in and you say, I need a mental health day, no questions asked, you get that day off. And you get 2 of those a year. Like, that is great to hear from a company that I used to work for. And I really hope that more companies are working towards that. Now, not every company can do that, right? Because not every company is a big company and not everybody has a lot of employees. But if you don't have a peer support group, become that peer support group. Start working that. Start working towards getting that group started for your company. And hopefully you have the wherewithal to get it done, and you have the means to get it done, and hopefully you're getting support from the people in upper management.
And sometimes you just need to go around management and do it anyways, and kind of be the silent leader in the background and just be like, all right, well, if you guys aren't going to support me, I'm just going to let it be known to everybody that, hey, if you're having a tough time, please reach out and call me. And there are good tools out there. There's plenty of things you could find on guidances or templates for like a peer support program. I did a great episode with Dan Cohen in Montgomery County Health District. He's a big peer support, advocate and working towards his therapist, becoming a, first responder therapist, because, as he mentioned, we just don't have a lot of us on the other side of the fence. Right. So a lot of the therapists I've been talking to, they might say that they're first responder, have experienced a first responder trauma. They really don't. They just don't understand it. And we're not cut from the same cloth as the general public. Studies have shown that repeatedly. So we got to look at different ways to take care of ourselves. But here's the challenge. It's just like Jim Green with Mission Ready. He mentions, hey, you can either accept it or you can choose to change it. Right. So by not doing anything, you are actually accepting that, okay, cool, this is where I'm at. This is where we're going to be. I feel like crap. Nobody's going to support me. Yeah, that's true. That's where we're going to lead it. It's the people that can find that energy, find that inner strength, that resiliency, that say, hey, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with just being silent. I'm not okay with watching my friends continue to harm themselves, right? Whether it be suicide, whether it be substance abuse, whether it be destroy their relationships, because typically it's our home life that explodes. It's not work all the time, right? So, but if I fall apart at home, that is absolutely going to impact the way I professionally work, the way I deliver my patient care. I'm not an effective first responder at that point. If you're a law enforcement officer, like you're you don't care about the next call. You don't care about going in after that suspect or investigating that a little bit further. I remember when I first got into EMS, like I loved it. It just the passion, everything about it, like just drew me to it, the medical side. But over time, I found myself just, hey, get on my flight gurney. Let's go. Shut up. Like, I was treating people like human cargo. I really was. It was depressing. And I look back and, I actually kind of like look at myself and I go, oh man, I was a horrible clinician. And I'm okay with that now because I wasn't the best clinician as I could be at that moment. I didn't have any control over it because I didn't know where I was. It wasn't until I got that emotional intelligence years later to go, oh, I was burned out. That's why I was treating everybody like cargo. I didn't want to take the next flight. Oh man, I got to go on another flight. Like, I lost the drive and the passion that I had. When we look at the toll of emotional labor, right, and how this affects us on a daily basis, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, they have a study. They got several studies out there that show that long-term prolonged exposure to emotional labor, right, being very empathetic and connected to what we're doing. And this is high stress, high adrenaline, people who potentially are life and death situation, and you're the person. Everybody's looking to you to make that save or you to make that difference. And you attach to these people. I know I've had several calls where I got so emotionally attached to that call, it literally broke me afterwards. Like I didn't want to talk to anybody. But I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know how I was dealing with this. But we know that being, exposed over and over and over to this without A, taking care of ourselves, B, getting support from organizations. I love the mental health day. This is actually the first time I've heard of a company doing that. And I love that. I love that the fact that they're doing it. So if you're in supervision or you're in management or senior leadership, please just take what Sam said to heart.
Yeah.
If you can, provide that. But I think it's important. We have to have the ability to recover. And well, like you said it, Sam, like, shortages are still there. Call volumes are going up. People are still getting sick, and it's impacting us in a way. And so we're not really getting ahead of it. So if we can't get ahead of it, I would still encourage people, don't give up, right? You still got to work at some of these things and do some of these tools that we're going to talk about downstream to maintain your health. Because what I would love to see is the new generation that's coming behind us, that they start having this emotional intelligence in EMT school and paramedic school and nursing school and the law enforcement academy. So that way, when they get out, they have those tools to at least start being successful and not let it build up like some of us old salty dogs over here, where it's a backpack full of shit that I'm just carrying around all day long. And I had someone that told me, he's like, you're just walking around with 2 hands full of shit. Like, doesn't that get old after a while? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know how to get rid of it. Like, it's just here. So, I get it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And bringing up Lindsay again, that was another thing that we talked about. And we had a genius idea while we were talking the other day, having this conversation is what if we started at the student level, right? So I spoke with a paramedic coordinator the other day on my podcast, and he talked about how in his paramedic classes, he almost kind of he didn't want to say the word force, but he said we do require that people talk to therapists during their paramedic program. And that's really cool, right? When we don't ever want to use the word force, because if you're putting them in this position, you are probably going to make a negative impact on this person, and they might not seek that therapy later in the future. So what we talked about is maybe potentially, instead of having these therapy sessions what if we did a group session for 30 minutes to an hour once a week, where once clinicals are starting, or even before clinicals are starting, why don't we take these lunch breaks and talk together as a group, right? Because then you have a lot of peer-to-peer conversation. And my idea was to have the EMT basics, and I don't know what you guys have where you're from, but we have EMT basics, intermediates, and paramedics here. What if you had them all sitting in a group talking about these problems, and then you can choose to participate by talking, or you can just listen to what other people are going through. And I just think it was a really good idea. And I think it's something that we can start pushing forward, something that is only going to take half an hour to an hour out of your week for these paramedic instructors, these EMT instructors, to allow their students to sit down and have this conversation. Because we know that our classes are, you find your buddies in these classes, right? Because you are going through these high stress situations together. But what if they had the opportunity to learn from the paramedics, to hear what they're going through as well?
Or hear from their mentors, right? The
Right.
people that they look up to. I had a similar podcast not too long ago with a university, or he's a college director, but he also had, paramedic programs and stuff like that. They actually track the critical calls that their students go on, and they will proactively intervene to make sure that they're okay. And they track their mental health and emotional well-being just as much as they do their clinical skills. And that teaches these individuals, these students, that when they get out there, that it's okay. Like, that's where it starts. I think this new generation that's coming into the service, coming into our industries, new nurses, all of that, you're seeing that they are being armed. Like Portland police, they actually go through, what was it, 4 hours a day or something like that. They actually go through emotional training. They do that through the academy. I can't remember all the specifics, but I brought it up in the last episode. But I was like, wow, Portland PD. Why? Because they recognize that if they can help stave off or give their new recruits the tools, they don't leave. We don't have less negative instances or occurrences occur. And that to me tells me that the organization is really valuing who that person is, not for what they bring to the table, but as a person, as a human. And that's what we got to kind of keep. I feel like, some of the large corporations, they forget that we're human beings and we can't run that hard. It's like taking a horse to a track. If you were to have that horse do their race and then immediately put them in another race and then put them in another race, what's going to happen to that horse? We all know it's going to happen. That horse is going to drop dead.
Yeah.
Well, what's different from the racehorse than different from me? Because I'm a racehorse. I'm a racehorse when it comes to, critical care, when it comes to patient care and EMS. Like, I want to be that racehorse because every time I get a call, I'm putting everything I have and leaving it on the field before I walk off to try to make a difference in that patient. What's going to happen to me if I don't take the time to step away from that, to breathe, and more importantly, have someone monitoring my own emotional health and be proactive of, oh my gosh, like, he's gone on 3 codes today. Like, we got to intervene, like, and be proactive. And so I definitely encourage programs and leadership. And, if you are a manager, even as a paramedic, I still call you a supervisor because your EMT looks up to you. You're technically the lead on that truck. So you're still a supervisor. You can still be a leader and a mentor. But it's just taking that step. A lot of people go, oh, well, if we're gonna do exactly what Sam said, we're gonna get all these people in the room. Oh, we're gonna talk about feelings. We're gonna talk about kumbaya. And I remember making jokes about that shit. I do. Because I was one of those people like, I don't got feelings, Yeah, until you become an alcoholic and you realize your life is a flaming trash can full of dog poop, it really awakens you. And so if we keep that mentality and we don't change it, it's not going to go away. But if we can switch our perspective and look at it a little bit more proactively and go, hey, it's okay. We actually need to do this. And by doing this, it's just like you and I having this conversation right now, Sam, like, it makes me feel better. I feel connected, right? It can be something very small. You don't need to have a big kumbaya. It could be, hey, let's just go for a walk around the building. Let's go park the truck real quick and just do a lap around the park and just talk, because just by starting the conversation, you never know where that conversation goes, right? And so maybe you can get that person to open up to you through just little things like that.
Right. And I think that's a huge, huge proponent of it, right? Changing that culture. We've talked about changing the culture a lot, but also changing the culture, like, within the cabin, right? So what do we all do when we're riding in the ambulance or the fire trucks? We're hanging out all day, we're lounging, we're not doing much. Whether you're in a super busy ambulance service or, a not so busy ambulance service, you're sitting the majority of the day, because that is what we do. We sit in these trucks. Take that minute, park the truck, get out, walk around, have that genuine conversation, either with your partner, or if your partner's not up for it, have that genuine conversation with yourself. Get out, move around. Change that culture. Change that culture. Because It's a huge thing, I know, with the fire service, and it's a huge thing here for our EMS crews and for our fellow our fellow healthcare responders in the ER to, when you get off shift, go to the bar that's open and start drinking. And while that's really cool and it offers a lot of camaraderie, that's kind of a red flag, right? That's a huge red flag. So changing that culture, going on walks, participating in 5Ks, 10Ks, or if that's not your thing, going to the beach or going to whatever local monuments that you have in your state or park or whatever, and get out and go hike is a better opportunity than going and drinking, in my opinion.
100%. I'm a huge proponent, if you've been following the podcast or know who I am, of getting outdoors, because getting outdoors connects you in so many different ways that you just can't replicate it. It becomes hard. Like I notice in the wintertime, I have a harder time because the daylight gets shorter. It's
Yeah.
cold and it's literally snowing right now. I think we got like 6 inches out there. It's supposed to be
Ugh.
up to a foot by tomorrow. So, there's not a lot I want to go do outside right now. Right. But I have to
Mm.
find these little things of, okay, I can't do that, but what can I do to help myself? Because I know in the summertime, I feel great. Good sunlight. I'm outdoors all the time, playing with my kids, going boating, camping. Get outside. You don't need to do much, but doing something is better than doing nothing. And I like how you talked
Yes.
about it, because one of the things that really stuck to my mind is you mentioned, hey, we get off shift, we go to the bar, right? I remember, many, many times in my career as a firefighter, we would get off shift at 7:30 in the morning. We would go get breakfast at this place called Little Mexico in Tucson. And guess what? We're having beer. It's beer 30.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
by beer 30, sometimes beer 30 would turn into just all day drinking, and yes, while that builds camaraderie, you can do that camaraderie instead of, hey, let's go to breakfast and go on a hike, or, hey, let's all meet up and go snow skiing or snowshoeing, or, hey, let's get out and go for a run or something.
Yeah.
I love the crews that would get outside with me and do workouts, right? Because you mentioned like, hey, we're on the truck a lot. Hell, we would take our truck over to the park and we would play football, frisbee, things like that. We had a really good captain that kind of really, allowed us to do that. And that was great, because just that little break of running a house fire or something like that, and everybody wants to go back and just, lay out or whatever. Hey, we got to get our PT in. That's important. Hey, what are we going to do today? Like, let's just go over to the park, dude. We'll throw around the frisbee for a little bit. And what you find is I'm getting that camaraderie and I'm being able to connect. And it changes my mental thinking of, okay, go, 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 go. Just that little reprieve right there is extremely helpful. And you can find those little reprieves throughout your shift. You can find them when you're off too. So I would encourage people to get out there and try to figure this stuff out. Because when we talk about empathy, it goes to exhaustion, right? If I start losing my empathetic drive, I get, compassion fatigue. One of the signs that I see is I'm just exhausted. I don't have any energy. I don't have any desire to go do anything. I don't want to go to the movies with my kids. Like, I just want to sit down and self-isolate, really. And that we know leads to other negative consequences, because then, we get in our head, and that starts getting louder. We start self-talk and negative self-talk, and it just destroys who we are. But when we look at empathy, it's a core attribute, I think, of a lot of first responders. We got into this because we are empathetic and we care. We want to make a difference. But that compassion fatigue, when we're consistently extended into crisis mode all the time, which we're seeing with, more and more burnout, more and more call volumes going up, not getting the support, not having enough personnel to staff, that's what's going to continue to break us. And it becomes a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword because I want to help people, but I can't. And I can't help other people behind me, but I want to, but I don't know how to do it because I've just lost the drive. So it's hard.
It is hard. And I will tell you that I'll admit that part of my compassion fatigue was mostly my fault, right? Because we were so short staffed that I was picking up so much overtime. And all I could think is money, 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 and not realizing the effects that was having on me and my soul. Looking back at it now, I tell everybody, the overtime is not worth it. Your job while we get into it to help people and be part of this community and help this community, is still just that, a job, right? Like, you go to work to get paid to be there to help people, but you also need to have that separation. You need to have that time at home. You need to remember that you have family that you need to give yourself to and your time to, not just to work.
That was me. Like when we moved from Utah down to Tucson, my wife was in the perfusion program down there. And so she's busy all the time. And I was like, well, hey, I'll just work a lot because you're never home, and she's always, studying and doing what she needed to do for her master's. But at the same time, I wanted to keep, our finances, and not have to borrow so much. So what did I do? At the peak of my career, I was working for 2 fire departments and an air medical service. I would get 1 day off a week, and I did that for almost a year. And yeah, money's great. If you need a second job, what I would highly recommend, go be a Walmart door greeter or work at Home Depot for shit's sakes. Like, do something that is not going to, I don't need to be empathetic as a Walmart door greeter to the degree of a first responder. That's what I'm trying to say. There's nothing talking bad about Walmart door greeters, because guess what? I love them. But at the same point in time, what I'm trying to say is, if you do need that extra money, because a lot of us, we know we don't make a lot, right? Because, well, that's another contention for another episode. But that does. And that's what people don't realize. Like that in itself, because we are not paid well, we have to go out and work more. And by working more, man, I can tell you, the overtime is not worth it, because what you will find is, you get the money now, but really your body and your mind, more importantly, are going to be paying for that years and years to come. And some of that stuff you just can't go back and unscrew. And so it's permanent damage almost. So you got to be mindful. I would highly encourage people that if you need a second job, you need some extra income, don't pull the overtime shift. I know, and that, once again, that plays into our empathetic thing. I had a supervisor that play that all the time. Well, if you don't come in, we're not going to be able to help anybody. Well, I'm sorry, it's not my problem. That's a management problem. That's a company problem. They try to make that your problem, and they guilt you into taking the next shift, the overtime, staying longer. I mean, I was on shift for 28 days. That's my biggest record. 28 days straight of call after call after call, because I felt like I needed a cover, because I needed to train these new people, and I was the only FTO. And guess what? Like, I always had to be on. And so I didn't go home for 28 days. And
that's gross.
And yeah, it is gross. But I look back and I was like, oh yeah, I got this. I'm Billy Badass because I'm the FTO. And, and they guilt you into like, oh, well, if you don't, then the aircraft's out of service, and, we can't make money, and we're gonna have to close the bed. All this stuff, the management has played those tricks on me. Trust me. And they play off of your empathetic drive to help people, because that's one of the things. I want to help patients, but when I need to have a shift covered or something like that, or, that's the first thing I think of. Oh, if I don't take this overtime shift, then someone's going to die because I wasn't there, and I can't live with that. Sorry. I can live with that now. And I'm sorry, because there's only so much Chris can do. And if Chris thinks he can save the world, Chris is going to end up killing himself. So you need to be protective of yourself and realize that it is not your problem. If they are short-staffed, they can't find coverage, not your problem. That is an organizational problem that needs to be solved. They don't need to take that out on you and basically play on your empathetic drive and basically take advantage of it to the point where you are doing self-harm to yourself. And that's what's going to happen. I can tell you, a lot of people work overtime and work 2 jobs in EMS or healthcare, or, law enforcement. I know they're, hey, I'm working for one department, I'm working security over here, for another department. That takes its toll on you. And like I said, the money's nice up front, but you end up paying for that for years to come.
Right. And you can't help your community if you can't help yourself. And if you are just running yourself to the ground and you can't have that, you're taking that longevity of the career away from yourself and from the community. So we saw a lot of that, pre-COVID, during COVID, like 100 times worse, 100 times worse, where you are failing your coworkers, you're failing your community, you're failing the whole world
Oh,
by not coming in
they
today.
played that fiddle so hard. And that's what
So
broke
hard.
everybody. I mean, we
Yes.
were already there, and it was basically like being extremely burned out, have extreme compassion fatigue. And then we got asked to get back on that horse and run another race. And like I said, it's only a matter of time before that horse is going to go down. There's only a
Yep.
matter of time before you yourself will go down. The problem is like you mentioned early on, Sam, is we don't see it. And so that's why I call it a fog. You just get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then there's a cliff and you're gone. And you're in the bottom of this pit of freaking despair or panic or fear or depression, or, some people like me, you get raging alcoholism, and
Yep.
that's what happened, and I realized that all of this stuff that I did, all these things that I used to think of like, hey, if I'm not helping, someone's dying, and I couldn't live with that. That is part of the emotional intelligence that you talked about earlier on. I think we absolutely need to do another episode just on that. But it's
Yeah.
something that people, if you're going to work yourself to death, be prepared. When we talk about, looking at some of these statistics of compassion fatigue and all this stuff, being in emotional trauma and crisis constantly, that increases our risk for stroke, heart attack, all sorts of diseases, because our cortisol levels are just through the roof,
Super
and
high.
that's not where the body is meant to run, right? We can do sprints up there, but it's not meant to be pegged out on the tachometer for days on end, for months on end. And some people, they feel like they've been in that emotional, compassion fatigue for years almost. I think I was probably in it at least for 3 years, that I can honestly look at myself and go, yeah, for 3 years, I was literally just showing up to work, moving people around like they were UPS boxes. And that was it. I didn't give a flying frick.
Yeah, Austin Kaiser was telling me that when
Austin's a good dude.
he's a great guy. He was saying that when you have your cortisol levels elevated, say as soon as you get to work, if you have a good program that has your truck ready, fully stocked for you, like as soon as you get there, you clock in, you're in that truck, you're gone for 12 hours, your cortisol levels are up this high for 12 hours, almost guaranteed you're going to be getting off late, right? Either 13 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours, depending on how you're getting
Mandatory
your chart.
holdover for another day or two.
Yes, then he said that you need to have just as much downtime as you had uptime for your cortisol levels. And if you're working 12-hour shifts, how are you getting that when an hour of your time is being dedicated to driving just to and from work? Then you have another hour of time getting ready in the morning, another hour at home when you're trying to decompress, and then you're sleeping. How do you catch up? It's super hard to catch up.
You don't. It's a
Yeah.
pace. And that's the thing. We don't know how to pace ourselves as first
No.
responders. We like to just go hard all day. And I like how Austin said that. I would even beg this, there should be a 3-to-1 ratio. For every one that I'm pegged to the needle, I probably should have 2 or 3 where I'm in idle mode, just cruising along, kind of things like that. But we don't get that opportunity. And I mentioned mandatory holdovers. Those are horrible.
There.
I mean, if I'm getting mandatorily, like, you know what? And that's how the organization dealt with not being able to cover people. Instead of spending more money and paying people more, to recruit more, to, whatever that is that needs to be happening with that organization, they just said, well, we can fix this real quick. Mandatory holdovers.
Right.
Well,
And
if
most
I
of them
had
make
24 hours,
most of them make you sign those contracts when you come onto the job, but then you work for then you work for a government position like a firefighter or whatever, and they're like, oh, okay, you did 24, you're going to stay on another 24, and then you're back on your regular 24 after that. So you're gone for 72 hours.
For 3 days. And that's where I was getting to. So if I had a bad shift, and then I'm thinking I'm getting off in the morning, and then I get a phone call from admin that says, no, you got to stay on and cover this. Maybe I needed that. And I don't get the opportunity to say, oh, I really need to go home. Like, I got life going on. Because think about how much stress, like if I had my 1 day off in between my set to go, hey, maybe I had to help my wife out, take my daughter to the doctor appointment. Think about all of that now increases. My stress is up. I'm failing my family. I'm not helping myself. I'm being constantly bombarded with crisis and trauma, and I'm not getting any downtime for myself. And that was one of my problems. It's like I would work and then I'd have to come home and be a family guy. So I got to take care of the house. I got to take care of the kids. All of that doesn't go away. And what ends up happening is, well, we need work to survive and pay for things, right? So we end up starting to let this side go. We let the home, we let our marriage, we let our relationships. I didn't see any of my friends for probably 2 months when I was in that stretch of 28 days. Because guess what? I got home, had 6 days off, and I was back for another 6. So on my 6 days, I'm trying to catch up on house. I'm trying to catch up on home. Um, you know, and you just feel exhausted. All you want to do is just lay there, sit down, do nothing. And for me, because I didn't want to hear all the noises in my head and things like that going on, I would drink. And that is one of the probably the biggest problems we have. And I don't see a huge swing in the pendulum to try to address that. Addressing pay would be great, because now these people don't have to work and burn themselves out and run race after race after race just to survive, just to provide for their families. Good organizations ensuring that they have full staffing and they're providing ways for people to check out. I like the programs that are out there that are self-monitoring their employees for critical calls, because it's like, hey, you guys just had a critical call. Why don't you just go down for an hour and go grab a burger, a bite to eat, or go for a walk? We don't have that proactive leadership fully in place yet. I have seen an improvement and it is trending that way. But the problem is while we're trending that way, the ramp up of everything else because of low pay and everything else is it's still kicking our butt, and we're not going to get ahead of this bell curve.
Right. Yeah. Especially with inflation, right? We're not seeing our raises, or we're not getting that price match with inflation. But I also see no reason to, speaking from a management side, and I'm not a manager, but if I was a manager, I wouldn't want to increase that pay, right? Because if you increase that pay, you're going to have less people picking up the overtime. And if you're already short-staffed, you need people to pick that up overtime up. And we're not pumping out enough EMTs. We're not pumping out enough paramedics. We're not pumping out enough first responders to cover these areas that need to be covered. So what do? We keep the pay low. We make mandatory overtime, or we offer incentives, right? I don't know if that's something that you've seen recently. I've been seeing incentives for picking up overtime, $100, $200 per shift, right? Or if you work 2 extra overtimes in a pay period, we'll give you an extra $400. I have friends that have done that, and between the two of them made over $150,000 in a year based on an EMT paramedic salary that was very low. So the amount of overtime that they had to get to that is insane. And they're okay with it because they have that money.
Yeah. And if you took all that overtime and invested it in investments or the stock market or real estate, then I would say you probably are winning to some degree, because hopefully you can get out of this industry quicker and retire.
Yeah.
But money, most of us are not. Most of us are not doing that. We're using it to stay alive or travel or buy material things, because I was that person. That's what happens. Money is king. And you're right. Organizations know that. It's kind of like they control the supply versus demand, but it's also why, they don't want to push for a raise increase, right? Well, that would be, it kills their profit, because it's not like reimbursement rates are going up with inflation either, right? No. So for a lot of these smaller agencies, inflation is almost causing them to go out of business. A lot of critical access hospitals have closed this last year. A lot of people don't realize that's a bad thing. If you live in a big city like I do in Salt Lake, great. But if you live 2-3 hours out of here and you get hurt, or you're in that local community, there's no OB, there's not even an ER, there's no emergent care. It is literally the ambulance picking you up with the paramedic and driving you 2 to 3 hours to a hospital. And you're hoping that they've had the training and the education and they've stayed up on their stuff to treat you and treat you if you're critical. Because other than that, you're going to start seeing public health swing the other way, which is the first time in a long time we're seeing the decline of the total number of years we expect out of males and females. So, but we also look at, I want to talk a little bit about secondary traumatic stress, or what we call STS. A lot of studies have come out recently about STS, but it's kind of the same thing. It looks at secondary traumatic stress. It's just another layer or another brick in your backpack, however you want to look at it, that is going to stack things against us. And we know, just like with constant emotional exposure to trauma and things like that, and just high stress work environments, that increases our risk of heart disease and cardiovascular disease and death, really, at the end of the day. So does secondary traumatic stress.
Yeah, I've never heard of secondary traumatic stress, so that's a new one on me. I would be curious to hear more information about that. But I talked to a young lady named Gabby who talked about adverse childhood experiences. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have. And generational trauma from Alexander Jabir with emergency resilience. Like, it is crazy to see like what my parents went through is affecting me and I don't even know it. Like, that's the biological. I mean, we're learning so much more about the body and genomes and things like that. But yeah, it's crazy.
Right. And it's not just affecting you mentally, it's affecting you physically.
Mhm.
Like, it is physically altering your life and you don't even know that it is.
And once
Yeah.
again, you're in that fog. You don't know what you don't know. So hopefully you're
Yeah.
listening to this and you're like, I'm walking away some pearls of wisdom, because that's the whole idea of these episodes, people, is really just to make you think, make you question what you're doing, because these are the things that I did not do and I wish I would have throughout my career. And, I'm hopefully, by having these conversations, we're having other people kind of talk about it. Let's kind of get into self-care strategies, because, okay, we kind of talked about, I think we beat it with a dead horse almost, to death. But, now we've talked about what it is, why it's bad for you, what are some of the proponents and things that are leading up to that. But let's talk about some strategies, because I always like to give people tools, tips, and tricks on walking away from one of these episodes. And literally, you can apply what we're going to talk about in this next section and do it right now. And I promise you that if you are consistent with it and you jump into this, because once again, you can't lead a horse to water and expect it to drink. You got to be able to be willing to drink the Kool-Aid, folks. And so, these self-care strategies that we're going to talk about, I want you to try some of them. If you're not doing any of these, like meditation, journaling, yeah, it all seems like kumbaya, whatever you want to go down. But I'm telling you, by doing this stuff, it absolutely changes your physiology, your neuroplasticity, your literally your physics of your life. When we talk about biological age and things like that, as we're learning more and more about this stuff, the way we eat, the way we sleep, all of these things play a factor on how long we're going to live and if we're going to die of some random disease like cancer, which we already have an increase number. If you look at first responders across the board, higher incidence of stroke, higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, higher incidence of suicide. Like, come on, folks, we got to do something here. So by not doing anything, you're actually just saying, okay, cool, I'm going to might as well just turn over and lay down and die and go out to pasture, call it a day. But I'm not there yet. I did try to commit suicide, and, I had to make a coming to Jesus moment. Like, do I want to live or do I want to die? And honestly, I got to that point and I chose to live. And one of the reasons why I do this. So let's talk about some self-care, Sam. How can we give some tips to our listeners and viewers to walk away with just some basic stuff that they can try to hopefully recognize whether or not they have, compassion fatigue? I think you should hopefully have figured that out now by listening to the beginning of this episode. But how can they walk away? What are some things that they can do on a daily basis or after a shift or anything that they can, continue? Maybe you're not going to heal yourself, but you can at least start working towards taking some of the crap, the shit, and dumping it off your hands,
Right. And I kind of mentioned it earlier on as well. Like, one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn in this career is taking care of yourself first. That is the huge thing, especially for longevity in this career, is you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, not only physically, but emotionally as well. Seeking that therapist, getting that trauma person, whoever that you need to talk to, or even talking with a buddy. One of my biggest things was starting the podcast. Story sharing, right? At the end of the day, when I was working in the 911 system, we would all huddle into this very small room, and it was called the charting room, where it fit like probably 3 or 4 chairs, but we would often squeeze 7, 8, 9 chairs in there while we were all charting and talking amongst each other, sharing those stories. And that was a big thing for me. It was very cathartic. Starting the podcast made it very cathartic for me, going and sharing those stories and starting to help my emotional being to get better by story sharing. I think that's just a huge part of it. And that's how I do it.
And that is a good thing. I mean, I think we can share stories without all the glorified guts and trauma. I think there's a difference between when we're trying to really go the extreme to try to one up somebody on a story versus like, hey, I'm just telling a story to tell a story and get it off my chest. It's one of the reasons why we created the Mind Shield, 24/7 hotline. It's not a crisis hotline. It's just a debrief hotline. Because sometimes if you don't have that opportunity, or maybe you didn't have time on, while you're on shift, as you're driving home, you could call this hotline and talk to a first responder and just vent and get it off your chest, talk about the call, talk about whatever. But so you don't have to take it to the next call, or hopefully you don't have to take it home to your family. And hopefully they can give you some tips and tricks and things like that, and just be a comforting person to go, at least I know I have a safe place. And that could be found in the Mind Shield program with Mind the Frontline. That could be found, by calling or having a friend. Like, I have friends who are not part of EMS. They have no ties to first responder or public safety. And I call them because, and I don't tell them all these stories, right? Because I'm not going to traumatize them. You got to be careful on who we're offloading to. But just having a conversation like, yeah, man, I had a really hard shift, or, it's just really kind of, just by talking, it's not that they fixed anything, but they were just someone I could get this off my chest. And that's important. If you can't offload your baggage, it just gets heavier and heavier. Some other things that you guys can look at when it comes to like self-care strategies, it starts with diet and sleep. I will tell you this right now. What you eat actually does matter. There's a lot of research that has come out on binomes and things like that really look at what we eat, processed versus plant-based. I get it. We all like a good steak or a hamburger every now and then. But what I'm telling you is, we typically, and I know at least for me, like when I was on shift and, if you're doing back-to-back flights and, okay, cool, whatever they got in the cafeteria or the break room is what I'm taking, which is usually deep fried and greatness. And, so be mindful of what you eat. Meal prepping is a great way to do it. Do your best to get 8 hours of sleep. Get off your screens after nighttime. Derek Barbaro, he's one of my just one of the people that I work with. I'm not going to out him or anything, but he's a good guy that I can confide in. And I like it because he's got a natural diet. For him, he turns off, like when it turns into nighttime outside, he starts turning off all the lights and turns off his screens and things like that, because now our brains start getting rewired to the point where like, oh, okay, it's time to steady my brain, start turning things off, get the loud noises to kind of dampen a little bit and get focused, and hopefully it gets you in a good spot. I know that's not always possible, but what I'm saying is you got to try something, and consistency is key here. So, try, and something is better than nothing. If you only meal prep 1 out of your 3 shifts this week, great. You're making a change. You're making a difference. 1%. It's progress, not perfection, people. So, don't give that up. Journaling. Journaling is a great thing. Pen to paper. I like how you talked about, if you don't have a partner or anything, just go out and have a conversation with yourself. It's funny. It took me a while to get comfortable with that, because I'm like, God, I sound like a freaking crazy man when I'm talking to myself in my car or just like here in my office. But I've done that a lot more, because it does. It's cathartic. It feels like, I hate to say this, but like, hey, higher power, take this away. I'm feeling, super depressed, or I got a lot of fear or anxiety, or life is really squashing me down. It's funny, by just saying that. I did this actually this morning. I'll tell you this, because I've been kind of stressed lately with starting a new project, and obviously Mind the Frontline and trying to get this off the ground and everything we got going with that. I've been waking up at about 4 a.m. every morning, just waking up, bing, my thoughts are going at 100 miles an hour. And I couldn't go back to sleep the last couple of days. This morning, I literally said it out loud. I was like, hey, you up there, can you do me a favor? Like, I really want to get another hours of sleep. I don't know why I'm stressed. I don't know why I can turn this off. And just by talking out loud and slightly under my breath, so I didn't wake my wife up and have the bear come up and kill me. I actually got back to sleep. I actually did. Like, so little things like this work. What are some other things that you do, Sam?
Oh man. I do try to get out on the weekends when I can. So I talk about this a lot. Like I used to work a lot. I told you I picked up overtime like crazy. Once I stopped doing that, once I got into a position where I was comfortable and I could do things, I had a lot of free time and I didn't know what to do. So I started my own hobbies and I like to go metal detecting. I like to do coin roll hunting. I like to do a lot of that weird stuff. And that's what finally led up to the podcast. But
It's not weird. It's a
yeah,
hobby. It's
it's,
something that's helping you. I hate so don't take that down. Like that's negative
I'm not,
self-talk right there. It's funny because I gave one of my my very first talk not my very first talk, but when I really talked about my Sentinel event is when I kind of call it. I did it at Crash and Learn, the very first Crash and Learn that we had here in Salt Lake. And I asked some of the people out there, like, what are you doing that helps you? I had one person tell me they got into Kempo and they like to get their ass kicked. I got someone else that said, hey, I got into pottery. Someone else said, hey, I learned a new instrument. Doing something, find something that brings you that joy back in your life, that gets you motivated, gets you fired. You want to volunteer? We're always need volunteers over here. We got a purpose and a mission. So, but find that one thing that's outside of work that
yes.
you can identify with. And that could be video gaming, whatever that is. And sometimes I do I have my buddies from high school. We're also friends because we were on the swim team for years. We never left each other's side, but we still get together every now and then on the weekends or a weeknight, and we play GoldenEye on my N64 downstairs. And I can't tell you that by just having a couple of guys over and throwing darts and playing, GoldenEye and Bomberman, like, man, I feel great the next day. Fucking
Yeah, those are
amazing.
two very great games. Two very great games. I did want to touch a little bit on kind of some of the stuff that you had talked about a little bit ago, and I really wanted
Sure.
to shout you out. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. You talked about how not all of us want to talk about the blood and gore and stuff, and I want to make it clear that like when I'm asking people like what your worst call was, I'm not asking for the gore, and it's not always going to be the gore. It's going to be what is affecting you the most, because not everybody is going to feel the same way, and that depends on what part of your life that you're in at that moment that call is going to affect you, and it happens differently every single day. Something's going to affect you worse than anything else did, which is really important to understand. But something that I've also started doing in the last several years is packing and bringing my own lunch. Having a cooler with you and having those snacks available to you, and then that food when you're ready to have it, prepares you, right, to eat on the go if you need to. But then it also helps you mentally, like you were saying, like how you eat and changing your diet up makes a huge difference in how your day is going to go. I remember a lot of the time working on the ambulance or even in flight when you're out all day. Sometimes you don't have access to food. You don't have access to be especially in the middle of the night. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to have anywhere to eat other than a gas station. So now you're limited to chips, to the potentially egg salad or tuna salad sandwich that's there.
Processed
You're
food.
really risking yourself there. So coming into work with even if you just bake chicken, that's what I did for a long time. You get chicken and you bake it, and that's what you take with you. That is better for you and your body than
Chicken,
those chips.
quinoa, and sweet potatoes. I'd get a bunch of sweet potatoes, make a big old thing of quinoa, and now I got lunch and I got dinner. And if I get a call, and then well, I guess you can't see it anymore. My camera keeps going on and off. But even in my flight vest, I always kept a 5-hour energy because I need that instant stuff, and I don't want a ton of sugar because I'm gonna get the sugar crash. Even though I'm not saying that's any better. But I always kept like a Cliff Bar or a Kind Bar or something that was a little bit healthy that give me something until I could maybe get back to base. So I didn't get that impulsive, hey, let's go hit up Wendy's or let's go get the fried chicken or the God, I would love to stop by Mavericks or, the QT and pick up those little, tornadoes or whatever they're called, deep fried goodness, but God. And here's the thing, you're already fatigued, you're emotionally fatigued, and now you're going to take this food that's going to make you just feel like crap, so there are things about diet that you can definitely do. So I love how you mentioned that. I would do, so when I was on flight, because you never know how long those are going to be, and I didn't want to overcook anything and things like that, I got really good at crock potting. I would start
Yes.
it in the morning, and if I got called out, great. Oh, well, it's going to be
Yeah.
really, really soft and simmery and flavorful when I get back. And the cool thing is usually it makes enough, right, for the entire crew. And they started learning from me, like, oh, that's why he likes to get up. First thing I would get up in the morning on shift, I would get up and get my workout in. Got to get my workout in, get physical, because that's part of my job. And then that gets me in the right mindset for my day. And then it was, hey, gotta start dinner, right, at 9 o'clock in the morning in the crock pot. And then it usually goes into like checks and stuff like that. And then it would go into, okay, what's the education for today? Let's go do something. Let's play. Let's do a scenario. And that's assuming we haven't gotten tapped out already. So,
Sure.
but those are things that came after years of me doing it the wrong way. And I had to make a change. And you got to make a change. If you want to see the results, if you want the results, you got to work for it, folks. It's not just going to be a light switch. There is no magic pill. You're not dropping weight. You're not changing your attitude just on that. But I can tell you that by changing my diet and getting good sleep, those are the two things that I started noticing I had more energy. And it really it was tangible, right? I was like, man, I can get up easier in the morning. And I felt like I had more energy throughout the day. And it takes a couple of weeks of you being consistent on a diet and getting good sleep habits. But man, when it starts happening, you really do feel it.
Right. And for the people that are in the EMS system that work on an ambulance, like in the ambulance system that I worked in, we didn't have bases. They parked you in various locations around the city.
Oh God, I couldn't do that.
It was
Yuck.
terrible. It is terrible, especially if you're in some really
I've never
bad
worked for
areas.
a service like that. And I don't think I could. I'd be like, there's no way I could just spend my entire 12 or 24 or whatever in an ambulance. But I do know there's services out there, Southwest
Yes.
and AMR and things like that,
Yes.
that's just the way it is.
So if that's the kind of service that you're in, and like you bust your ass, for 12 hours. So at the end of the day, you're not wanting to go work out because you want to go home, or even in the early part of the day, like you're not wanting to go on a workout or whatever. Like take that minute when you're parked out somewhere and get out of the truck. Get your stand time, get your walk in, get those steps, like just progressively get to where you need to be. In the last almost 5 years, I've probably lost 40 pounds just by meal prepping, not doing anything super extra, just getting up and walking.
That's awesome.
It's fantastic.
And well, even if you're stuck in a box all day, right, you can bring a cooler with good meals, right?
Yes.
So you have that ready to go. Hey, most gas stations have a microwave. I promise you that. Because they need to heat up all their other shit.
Yes.
The other thing with that is this is something that I started doing because I would travel the bases, and I was I'm a PT guy, and these bases, not all the bases, I would have access to a home gym or any workout, supplies or anything. So because I would travel and have to fly into a lot of these places and then go out to the base and cover or open it up, whatever I was doing, I started traveling with just workout bands because I can create little mini workout. I can do push-ups, I can do this. And then now I got my bands to do shoulder things and, all sorts of things. And then, I started turning people on to kettlebells. Well, guess what? You can have a 20-pound kettlebell just sticking in the side of the box, and then you pull off the side, like you mentioned, get out and get a kettlebell workout in. I promise you a 15-minute kettlebell workout will kick your ass, but you will feel great afterwards. But you don't need a lot to do this. Like, I think a lot of people need like, oh, well, in order to eat well, I got to go to I can't do it at work. I got to wait till I get home so I can have my kitchen and all this other stuff. No, you don't need that. Oh, I can't work out because I'm stuck on a box all day and, we don't go to a gym or we don't have access to one. Okay, great. Get outside, you got a park, you got a parking garage, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. And what you will find is you will feel better. And then that rubs off on people around you because they see what you're doing. So once again, being a silent leader out there and being someone that takes action versus just accepting the status quo is important.
Right. And use your resources, right? We all have friends. We all have those like super yoked friends who that's all they do is work out all day. Like, don't be afraid to ask them what they do and what they think. Right? Exactly. Like ask them how, like what they think that you could do to make it a little bit better for yourself. And even just getting out, like doing lunges, doing those body workouts, if you don't have the tools like a kettlebell or whatever, like do the body
Calisthenics.
workouts too. Yes, calisthenics. And if you don't understand that, or if you don't have the education for it, like don't be afraid to ask.
YouTube. Trust me,
Yes,
people, there's a
YouTube.
lot of shit on YouTube. You can find almost anything
Exactly.
on how to make a bomb. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want the FBI raid my house, but you
Yeah.
can find anything on YouTube or Google nowadays. I can promise you that. And,
Yes.
you know, ChatGPT is free nowadays, people. So you can just go, hey, ChatGPT, create me a calisthenic workout. You know, it'll spit
Exactly.
out a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Like use your resources, try to find a way. Don't use, you know, don't look for the excuse, look for the answer, I guess is what I'm trying
Exactly.
to say. So, all right. Well, hey, I do want to wrap this up a little bit, but there's one thing I want to talk about. The last section that I want to kind of hit on is breaking the stigma, because I think the stigma around everything that we've talked about, every study that I've looked at, read, has talked about a stigma, and we know it exists.
Yeah.
We know it's here. I've talked about it multiple times, and you can kind of see it sometimes where, like I said, the stigma of I was a new booter. I come onto a fire department. They get off at 7:30. They go drink. I'm like, oh, that's normal, right? What I didn't realize is that those people were also suffering. That's how they were dealing with it. And then guess who picked that up? I did. And then I said, oh, well, that's just part of being in the fire service. No, it's not. It really isn't. It's just what we choose to do. So, you know, I want to talk about like, you know, what are some things that you do to help others break the stigma, or what do you do within your organization? You know, how do you address it? Because I think a lot of people are fearful. You know, they're fearful of their jobs, the way people are going to label or characterize them. First off, I tell you folks, don't give a flying F about what other people think about you. If you are doing the right thing for the right reason, and put your head on a pillow, you're doing the right thing. So don't let that detract from you.
Exactly. And I think like one of my big things is starting that podcast, right? And that was to help kind of break that stigma, because we do have that and we do hear about it all the time about how, again, that machismo, we are in, you know, fear of losing our jobs. We're in fear of losing our positions because we don't want to share our feelings. So one of the things that I do at work too is I'm very vocal, and not everybody likes that because they're like, oh, why are you saying that? Why are you talking about that at work? Like, no, I'm
Don't
pretty
stir it
vocal.
up.
Like,
Don't stir the pot.
yeah, tell me how you're feeling. Like, why did that call affect you? What do you want to talk about it? How could you have made it better for yourself? How could you have made it better for your partner? How could you have made it better for the company? Like, let's talk about it. Let's open it up. Let's share with everybody. You know what I mean? Don't hide it. Expose it.
100%. I think that's why I'm so vocal about it too, because I was like, well, I could choose to die and be a statistic, or I can choose to do something about it. And I honestly just give zero Fs. You know, it's
Yeah.
when I think about other people, and I don't say that in a negative, derogatory way. I say it like I do it, and I say it because it needs to be said. And
Yes.
I'm in a position where I don't have to worry about repercussions from admin or anything like that. I'm my own business owner, so it makes it a little bit easier. But I also foster that organizational culture within Mind the Front Line. If you ask a lot of our volunteers and our members, you know, it's just what we do. We talk about this stuff. And the biggest thing is we put that machismo stuff away, because that machismo stuff is what's killing us.
Yeah.
And we just become raw, open, transparent, honest, and humble. And the reason why I bring up the humble part and humility is because you really do need to take your ego out of this and ask for help when you need
Yeah.
it. And that is the biggest thing. People don't ask for help. And yes, a lot of it is fear, fear based, or, you know, what's going to happen afterwards, or, you know, I don't want people to look at me negatively. But what I have found by sharing my story, talking to a lot of people, and just putting it out there, nobody said anything.
Yeah.
Nobody judged me. Nobody talked down to me. Nobody cut me apart. Like none of that scary stuff that I thought was going to go on, because that's just my negative thought, my train of thought thinking up here. It's actually not reality. And so, you know, I encourage you people to stop listening to what's going on in your head and start listening to what's in your heart. Because if you guys can put that ego away and be humble, not only does that affect you, it affects everybody around you. And it really lets other people know and sets an example. And that, my friends, is one way that we can smash this freaking stigma. Because when people start seeing other people be honest and transparent and raw and talking about the shit that really is there that nobody wants to talk about, it's like, nope, there's no helmet behind me. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not there. That's what we're pretending to have happen. And for those of you that will be listening to this on the podcast, I have my flight helmet on hanging up on my wall, but it's basically like saying, I'm not going to admit that it's there. I'm not going to see it. We're just going to put it out of sight, put it out of mind, and act like it never even happened. And that shit, folks, is killing us. So I would highly encourage that you guys get with, do something. One thing, 1%, take one thing out of this episode that you guys listen to and try it or think about it or talk about it, more importantly, because I can promise you the more that you guys do talk about this, talk about your stories, inherently it's going to start unloading your baggage and your hands full of shit.
Exactly. And it's just a little off topic. Do you watch TikTok?
I don't, but my daughter's on my account. So if you guys have ever seen my TikTok account, it's my daughter. I don't even look at that thing, but she knows how to find it, create videos. But no, I typically, unless I'm seeing it come through like the Instagram thread or something like that. But go ahead. I want to hear this one. This sounds fun.
I do think that we are seeing a culture change amongst not just our first responders, but amongst everybody, right? And one of the big things is right now are the people who are recording other people at the gym are just getting slammed, right? Because they're recording other people who are at the gym and they're talking shit about them basically. And these people are getting called out. They're getting in a lot of trouble for basically being trolls on the internet. And that's kind of like how we are and where we are right now. If you're going to walk around telling somebody that they suck, they're not in this job for the right reasons, if they're upset about a call, if they need to take a time out, if you're one of those people calling them, terrible names just because they are having a hard time with a call, you need to change your mindset. We are not there anymore. This is back in the day, 80s, 90s stuff where we're now allowed to talk about how we feel, and we should be talking about how we feel. That stigma needs to be dropped. We need to get rid of it.
And you're seeing it, through celebrities that are getting called out. You're seeing, because people are just saying like, no, we are going to be human. We are going to be kind. And if you're not kind, we're going to start calling you out on it. And it's becoming more and more of an accepted culture not to do that shit, and we all know, if you're a first responder in public safety, we eat our young. We talk about how crappy they are, this and that. We just keep kicking and kicking and kicking. And I would highly invite those individuals to get the fuck out. Yep. And I'm going to be honest, because guess what? There is no place in this world for people like that. If you cannot be kind to your fellow human, and trust me, I'm like you all, I get upset, I get angry, I get mad, but there's a difference of getting mad and upset and actually follow through and actually being intentional with that hate or anger or resentment or whatever you're trying to attack that individual for. And I would highly encourage those individuals to leave the public safety industry. Get out. We don't want you here anymore. The way you guys did it 20 years ago is just got us to this very point of everybody killing themselves. So, what you were saying worked. It doesn't work. We know that. Yeah. Numbers are saying that. We're getting more and more vocal about it. And that's why I really feel like we're going to start seeing a really big swing here in hopefully the next couple of years. I'm waiting for the first year and the first time that we have less amount of suicides among first responders for the first time ever than the year before. And we're not there yet. And the trends are not going to support that we're getting there. But the more that we do stuff like this, Sam, and we say, hey, this is not okay. It's okay to not be okay. It is not okay to kick someone when they're down, to tear someone apart, to make fun of them, to basically, and it happens. I see it happen all the time. And sometimes it's no fault of that individual's own because they just don't know. And that's the way they were trained. That's the way they learned. And it's really hard to relearn a new way. But what I would encourage you is try. Because if you're not trying, you're basically saying, I'm one of those old salty dogs. I'm one of those people that think they're better than everybody else. And I'm one of those people that can do no wrong. And I'm going to continue to cut other people down to prop myself up, essentially, because I can't deal with my own Yes.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? Be kind to not only your fellow peers and other first responders and other healthcare professionals. Be kind to yourself. We talk down to ourselves so bad and so harshly all the time. How can you pick up other people if you can't even pick up yourself, right? So be kind to yourself. You didn't get here because you were dumb. You didn't get here because, you cheated your way through. You got here and you deserve to be here be kind to yourself.
I love that, Sam. And that is important. Love yourself, be kind to yourself. If you're your own worst enemy, which we can be at times, that's part of that emotional intelligence that Sam talked about. And if you don't know what emotional intelligence is, I encourage you to go YouTube it or Google it and learn about it or read about it. There's plenty of good books out there and that's one of the things I really got into this last couple of years is reading, professional development books, motivational books, things like that. And I've taken a lot of way from doing stuff like that. But, I think the biggest thing that I have learned, Sam, is exactly what you just said. I've learned how to love myself and love my defects. I am not perfect. I am not this Rambo or G.I. Joe or whatever you want to, whatever that guy's name is on Tacoma Fire, whatever episode you guys want to watch. But, I'm not, I'm an imperfect, beautiful person and I'm okay with that. And it takes a while to get to that point, but you got to start somewhere, folks. You got to get on that road. So,
yes.
Sam, any last thoughts that you want to kind of share with our viewers and our listeners before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think that's like the big takeaway, make sure that you're taking care of yourself and then making sure that you are forgiving yourself, right? We all make mistakes. Just like you said, we're not perfect. None of us are perfect. We all have our quirks. Forgive yourself, love yourself, talk to yourself like you mean it,
I love it, Sam. Well, you guys heard it. Sam, I just want to say thank you again for coming on the show. How can people find you?
Yeah, so I have the podcast 911 Nonsense podcast. You can find me on Instagram through Sam's Pursuit. And then you can find me on Facebook through 911 Nonsense. We have a page. But I host on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio.
Love it. So if you haven't, go check out Sam's show, 911 Nonsense. You get more of the same stuff that you just listened to today. And you can always go check out Mind the Frontline and the additional resources, the blogs, the podcast, all the stuff that we do to try to provide our first responders with the tools and just the raw discussions that we talk about to really kind of make change in our industry. So you're either accepting it and you're rolling over and dying, or you're actually doing something and helping those around you live a little bit longer. And with that, my name is Chris Matana. I'm your host, and I want to say thank you again for joining us for today's episode. And until next time, stay kind, stay you, and be mindful of others and mind the front line.
To our dedicated listeners, thank you again for joining us on this critical journey. Remember, the Critical Conversations podcast is a steadfast resource for police, fire, EMS, allied healthcare workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Your support makes the impact of these conversations resonate even further. If you found today's discussion enlightening and want to stay connected with our ongoing mission, please be sure to subscribe to the Critical Conversations podcast. You can find us via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and the Mind the Frontline website. Your subscription ensures that you will never miss an episode, and it's a powerful way to show your commitment to fostering resilience within the entire first responder community. For more information and additional resources, visit our website at www.mindthefrontline.org. Together, let's continue these critical conversations and build a stronger, more resilient first responder family. We thank you for being a part of the Critical Conversations podcast. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the front line.